We discussed growth, but what happens when, well, you're not really careful and you break something? Well, that's a wonderful discussion. There are three phases. There's a reactive phase, a reparative phase, and a bone remodeling phase. The easiest way to remember this is this. You break your bone, you're going to react. It hurts, holy guacamole. That's not a pleasant feeling. It is one of the most unwonderful feelings to have in the world. I broke my nose. It was not a fun thing to have. So you react. It goes, it hurts so much. But then you get over it eventually, and you start to repair. We will rebuild. Yes, this was a terrible loss, but we will rebuild. We will do our best. And foddling, you return to somewhat normal. Your bone remodels into the appropriate form. Now, let's go ahead and break these bits and pieces off together. You have the reactive phase, it hurts so much. The very first thing that you're going to do is form a hematoma. It's a very large clot to try and stave off the bleeding, to hopefully maybe rescue some of this bone. If you get to a doctor, the doctor is going to go ahead and set you up with a cast and hopefully set your bone correctly and set it up in a straight line. Maybe you'll need a couple of metal plates, maybe a cast, maybe all of the above, in order so that you can have this bone fuse appropriately. Because during the reparative phase, you actually have two stages within the reparative phase. You have a fibrocartilaginous callus formation, which, if you remember back from our tissues, the fibrocartilaginous is one of the stronger, more durable of the cartilages. It's there to help rebuild and repair, but also provide that framework that cartilage does already, that hyaline cartilage does when you're forming bone for the very first time. If that fibrocartilage is useful, it has repaired, it has done its thing, and has gotten to this stage, and the tissues and the blood and all that stuff has reformed, then you can go ahead and continue on into the bony callus formation. Remember the ossification, just like you're growing. It starts off as a cartilage and then goes into ossification. Same here. You're going on to a cartilage and going into ossification. Following after that, you'll notice that you do have a little bit more blood vessels there to help try and support and rebuild that bone. But if you've built it, you've given it that structural soundness that only bone can provide, you can eventually reform that. You can see that some of this compact bone that shouldn't quite be compact, should be compact bone, it's still somewhat spongy, does need to be remodeled and be given that strength again. There are several types of fractures that you do need to know. You got the compact or the compound open fracture. Literally means that you've got a bone sticking out of the skin. A common nuded fracture is one that you've shattered it. You've made a firework in your arm. Congratulations, pew pew, pow pow. Now it's going to be a really uncomfortable repair. Maybe a couple of metal joints to help keep that stable. Maybe you're going to get some of that bone removed. It just all depends on what happens. You also have the green stick fracture, which you'll see mostly in children. Only because children's bones are more collagenous. That has a lot more collagen in it than that of adult bones. The ratio between calcitrant material, the mineral deposits, and the collagen are very different. More mineral in adults than compared to that of children. Because of that, that protein can still stay intact even though you've broken off portions and bits and pieces of it. Kind of like snapping the difference between snapping a dry stick that's died off, really nice, easy, clean click and break, versus a green stick or a fresh stick, which breaks only partially. Impacted is, well, you have tried catching yourself and that bone has come together really hard on itself and, well, crushed against each other, crushed against itself. Potts and Coles, unfortunately, it was named after people that found it. So Pott was the one that found that, or described this particular fracture of the fibular, the distal portion of the fibula, while Coles was the one that discovered or described first time the fracture of the radial head. How I remember Pott is just walking down the streets of New Orleans. If you're not paying attention, it's very possible you're going to break or sprain your ankle because of all those potholes. These two aren't labeled in your book, but they are important. You got the boxer fracture. This is the one that if somebody gets really, really upset and decides to punch a wall, the wall's going to win out, especially if you don't know your technique and you haven't been training. With the spiral fracture, that's more of a you're turning around and about to run. You got yourself a football. You're going to try and make it to the goal, and somebody tackles you. Or you're rotating and then some giant force hits wherever bone gets a spiral fracture. Not a wonderful, comfortable situation. This is a femoral fracture that is going to take a lot of work to try and keep happy and rebuild appropriately. There is one last thing I wanted to point out that's more of an FYI concerning broken ribs. If you get a single rib, there's not much you can do. As long as it's not an open fracture, it's not a compound fracture, as well as it's not going down into your lungs and impeding your lungs or stabbing at your lungs or anything within your thoracic cavity, it's going to be left alone. If it lasts for 2 months, yeah, you probably should go see a doctor again. But if you have multiple rib fracture, usually due to some huge trauma, you get something called flail chest. You'll notice here I have a picture of this gentleman breathing out on the left and then breathing in on the right. You can see that it's opposite of what's going on. So when he's breathing out, this broken side of his chest is bulging out. But when he's breathing in, that chest is actually getting sucked in. This one, yes, definitely you're going to need to see a doctor. I'm going to go ahead and finish off here for this video. We'll be talking about the different types of roles in calcium homeostasis and how calcium is maintained in the blood and why.